And on the flip side of that, Alexander Hamilton wants to support England, really because we are large trade partners with them and does not want to anger or threaten that method of trade because he does not want the economy to be threatened by this war. So what President Washington does is actually go with neither. He sets up a huge precedent here with his proclamation of neutrality and says, we're not going to get involved in foreign affairs. We're going to stay out of Europe. We don't want to be involved in Europe. We are too young to have to worry about this. We are still trying to get up on our own feet. And that's basically going to be the Americans' politics up until the 1900s, where we don't get involved in foreign affairs. We do not get involved in what's happening in Europe. Now, Washington is going to have a crisis on his hands on the domestic side as well. And much like how we saw Shays' Rebellion, you're going to have what's called the Whiskey Rebellion. And the Whiskey Rebellion is going to be a section of Western farmers in Pennsylvania who do not like Alexander Hamilton's tax. And they feel like because they have not elected someone like Hamilton, that there is unfair taxation, that there is taxation without representation. And Washington is forced to take the same words of the American Revolution and basically try to swat them down. Now remember, with a quick little reminder here, with the Articles of Confederation, they could do nothing. It was up to the states to have to do this. And again, Massachusetts had to eventually do this with Shays' Rebellion and showed the weakness of the Articles of Confederation. That is no longer the case. With the Whiskey Rebellion, President Washington, under his guide and seeing this as a threat to public safety, will basically bring the National Guard to squash the Whiskey Rebellion. That these farmers don't have the right to just protest and cause violence because they don't like certain policies. And they're using the words taxation without representation. However, Washington's saying this is the government of the people. This is they do elect these people. Therefore, you cannot throw that in their face that this is not the same as the American Revolution where they did not have a say in Congress. And by being able to kind of throw down the hammer, the metaphorical hammer here, Washington shows the strength of the Constitution and kind of shows that it is not the same as the Articles of Confederation, and the federal government actually does have some power to protect the people. And again, just a couple little words here, these quotes about the Whiskey Rebellion. You can see how each of these men, Hamilton and Jefferson, really kind of see or view this rebellion here in Pennsylvania. Hamilton, of course, is his tax they're rebelling against. He's not going to like this and believes that the government should appear like Hercules to inspire strength and respect of his people. So really trying to kind of put the hammer down and really try to forcibly show that they have strength over their people. Jefferson's not the same. I mean, it would be ironic if he was any different, but his political enemy is having a rebellion against him. He's like, oh, rebellion is a good thing. Okay, every now and then it shows kind of the strength of the people, that the government is healthy. So be interesting to see if they were rebelling against his own tax or against his own policy, if Jefferson would feel the same way. However, it kind of shows their ability or their ideas for the role of government and the role of the people here. Again, Washington is going to stomp this down, and they're going to make sure that this does not happen again. So then we fast forward to 1796, and Washington chooses, and again, this is one of his most probably important precedents, is that he's going to choose to set a precedent to not run for president because he does not believe that presidents should run forever and does not want to serve for life. And this will actually create, where until we get to FDR, we will not have a president serve for more than 2 terms. And at this time, there was nowhere in the Constitution that said they could not. If John Adams wanted to run for a 3rd term, or if Thomas Jefferson wanted to run for a 3rd term, or if James Madison wanted to run, they could legally, but they do not. They set the precedent, or they follow the precedent set by President George Washington. They do not seek re-election in a 3rd term. We're then going to take a look at George Washington's farewell address in class, but a couple things we want to make sure we understand. He's going to warn against the growth of factions and political parties. Oh, if Washington knew where we were at today, right? That it creates too much angst and too much anger between Americans, and we should feel like we're all Americans. He warns against the growing tensions between the North and the South, kind of predicting and previewing what would happen in what we will see as the Civil War, where we have 2 regions fighting over economies, labor, taxation, and so forth. He's also going to talk about a desire for neutrality, not getting involved in entangling alliances, worrying about ourselves rather than what's going on in the rest of the world, becoming more isolationist. And with these words in the farewell address, the Federalists are going to run for a re-election with Washington's Vice President John Adams, and Thomas Jefferson is going to run on the Democratic side of the aisle. And really, the election was so close, and you can see here the electoral vote was 51 to 49. And with this, John Adams is going to defeat Thomas Jefferson and become the second president of the United States. And it's interesting how you can see how regions kind of vote along party lines, how the South was typically more Democratic Republican, while the North and the Northeast especially was more typically Federalist. So now that we're moving into John Adams' presidency, on a world account or a European account, there's still a war happening between England and France. And France is especially frustrated that we have not helped them, and they start to seize American merchant ships. So what the Americans have to try to protect themselves against this, and there's a cry out for what to do. Some want to go to war, some want to go help support the French, some want to try to support England, and Adams is going to try to be diplomatic, and he's going to try to send Americans to France to negotiate with the government to try to agree to allow trade happening in Europe. And when the U.S. ambassadors or the U.S. diplomats get to France, the people of France, these three advisors who have remained nameless throughout history, that were nicknamed X, Y, and Z, demanded that if they wanted to meet with the king or with the higher ups in the French government, they were going to have to bribe them. They were going to have to give them money, to give them some sort of pro quo. And the Americans refused. They were offended by this, that the French would even call for such a thing. And this alone called for some Americans to cry out for war against the French, that they had insulted the Americans so much. Adams is going to try to follow the words, however, of President Washington. He's going to try to keep his cool, and he's going to try to avoid war at all costs here. But this event is going to be called the XYZ affair, and in some people's eyes, it's going to be seen as a way of John Adams looking very weak. And it is the Democrat Republicans who are criticizing them for it because they don't believe that he has the strength to kind of to stop this crisis of American ships being taken over by the French. And they're ostracizing him and criticizing him in government. And the Federalists decide they're going to pass what's known as the Alien and Sedition Acts. And this is a big landmark piece of legislation in the history because what it essentially does, it makes it a crime to criticize the government or leaders of the government in public, in newspaper prints, and wherever you're doing it. It also makes it a lot easier to deport immigrants. So that's the both. So the alien side would be the immigration side. The sedition is to criticize the government. So it makes it illegal to do this. And there's going to be an attack on free speech here. Again, the First Amendment allows for you to do this. So you have the Democrat Republicans who are crying out this as an abridgment of the First Amendment. And you're going to have the likes of James Madison and Thomas Jefferson who want this nullified, who basically are telling states to not follow this. And they're going to write in their documents called the Kentucky and Virginia Resolutions how this is unconstitutional. They attack the Federalist Party for this. Again, they will basically suggest that states like Kentucky and Virginia just not follow this. And these arguments of state rights will be used all the way through the Civil War, that certain states should have the autonomy to not follow the law. Remember, under the Supremacy Clause, they're supposed to follow the law of the federal government. And you'll have frequently throughout the next 50 years, states threaten to secede when they don't like laws that are passed. South Carolina usually being the first. So almost to wrap up here, by the election of 1800, the Federalists are very unpopular. They're seen as being ruled by the wealthy class. They're seen as, again, not American, not following the First Amendment with the Alien Sedition Acts. And the Democrat Republicans are going to run on this, and they're actually going to win. And you can see here the vote from 73 to 65, the electoral vote 53% to 47%. Jefferson will become the first Democrat Republican president. And this will be the first time there's a transition of power between parties. And Jefferson is going to give a speech. When we get to period 4, we'll actually go through the speech and talk about it, how it is a landmark for it's the first peaceful transition of power. Because at this point, who knew what was going to happen? If the Federalists would go to war against the Anti-Federalists, that was very possible. So this speech of trying to bring the country together, he talks about we are all Federalists, we are all Democrat Republicans, we are all Americans. Again, we will read that speech in class. But this will start a 30-year dominance for the Democrat-Republican Party and essentially will kill off the Federalist Party. We'll see the recreation of the Democrat Party and the Whig Party moving forward from this. So guys, I hope you enjoyed this. Again, this is a recap here. We talked about the likes of the Washington and John Adams presidencies moving all the way up into the year 1800. This is the conclusion of our period 3 lecture videos. We will pick up with period 4 in our next unit, and I hope to see you then.